Hey there, listeners. Welcome to the Leadership is Changing podcast. Welcome to the Ask Dennis episode. My name is Denis Gianoutsos and I'm your host. Have you ever been in a situation where you have been thinking about doing something and it's taking up all your thinking and energy? Should I do it or not? Is it distracting you? Is your focus being effective? How do you say no to that actual situation? How do you walk away? Let's discuss.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
Hey there, listeners. Welcome to the Ask Dennis episode. This is a freestyle episode where I'm asked a question by our listeners, or I share my thoughts, experiences, and insights from working with many leaders around the globe. Now, in this bustling world of leadership, where decisions really start to shape the future and influence the lives of many, the ability to actually filter what matters most is really quite critical. Now, with all the pressures of demands and suggestions and opportunities, and all of that bombarding you as leaders daily, the skill of saying no starts to emerge not as a sign of limitation, but really a strategic tool to enable you to have clarity, focus, and effectiveness. Today's episode, we're going to explore the importance of this ability, the ability to say no, because when you're challenged as a leader in actually making decisions, exercising the ability to say no, there's actually some strategies that you need to put in place to be able to master that ability to say no. How do you actually navigate the distractions? How do you actually maintain focus as well? So let's get into some of these different areas. Let's talk about that noise, right? That distraction. How do you actually recognize it? Because you see, in the landscape of leadership today, it is filled with a lot of noise. You've got constant wave of emails coming at you, meetings, requests, and decisions that all demand your attention. Now, the noise is not just external, but it also can be internal. In other words, it's coming from within the organization. In fact, for some of us as leaders, we're actually doing it to ourselves. And then what do I mean by that? That could be in the form of what ambitions you might have, what ideas, initiatives, goals, all those kind of things can actually start to cause some of that noise and distraction. The challenge lies not with the quantity of these distractions, but in their quality. Not all demands, not everything that needs to be done or was being requested of us or being asked of us is worthy of our attention. If you can have the ability to sift through that noise, to differentiate between what's urgent and what is important, that is a skill that you must develop and continue to grow. Something else I want to talk about here is about keeping the main thing the main thing. The thing that's at center of effective leadership is your capacity to actually focus, right? To stay on track. And that focus is a lens. Now, if you think about like a microscope, right? It's got a lens, but you can go and actually zoom in on your goals and tasks that really do matter. Then align all of that with your vision and the organization's objectives, initiatives, or goals. See, if you've got clarity around of purpose, then that's really essential about being able to lead in today's fast-paced information or data-saturated world. It is just full of it, where the risk is of being led astray is by those less important items. That's quite high in actually being distracted. And the items that are not as important as others. Now, without focused leaders, risk wasting their energies on the tasks that, well, perhaps aren't urgent or are urgent, but don't really advance you towards your goal or your mission or the initiative. So in other words, the key here is to focus on keeping the main thing the main thing. In other words, with all those distractions, can you actually filter and focus on the right things to do? Now, for a lot of people, they find it quite hard to say no. And it's often easier said than done. Several things actually can contribute to the difficulty that leaders face in relation to this. First of all, and here's an interesting one, there is a fear of missing out, what we call FOMO, F-O-M-O, a concern that by rejecting an opportunity might be closing the door on potentially a beneficial venture, possibly, right? And then there's a desire to please people. And now, naturally, that's a human trait that we can lead, leaders can overcommit themselves and their teams just to be able to please other people. There's another area as well, which is sometimes it challenges people's egos, where there's a belief in one's capacity to do it, and they can cloud, but it can also cloud their judgment and lead to something that's really, really not nice at all, and that's called leader burnout. So the important thing here is 3 areas. One is that people feel like there might be a FOMO, there's the fear of missing out, not being part of something. There's the ability to, or what we think is not an ability, but it's people wanting to please others. And then the other one is sometimes people's egos are challenged. And so that can actually cloud people's judgment, or as I said, lead to burnout. Now, the thing here is, here are some strategies to actually help you with saying no and possibly refusing to do something. Now, mastering the art of saying no requires actually intentional practice, strategic thinking, because you need to be really smart about actually saying no to people. Now, the thing here is this, there's some possible strategies for leaders to think about to adopt saying no. If the thing that you're being asked to do is not aligning with your personal values or the organizational strategic objectives, and if the answer is no, then it becomes easier for you to refuse to do it or walk away, right? So there's no alignment there, it becomes a lot easier. So one thing I would say to you is to think about, what are you being asked to do, or what are you thinking to do? And is it aligning with your personal values and the organization's objectives? Number 2 would be prioritization. You've got to get good at prioritizing tasks and initiatives. That means not only identifying what is most important, but also you may want to delay or decline those less critical activities. So it's not always saying no. Sometimes it's saying not yet. And there's a difference, right? So you may not be able to do something today, but you may be able to do it in a month's time, 2 months' time, 3 weeks' time, 2 weeks' time. But you're not saying no to it, but you're just saying not yet. The third one is delegation. So not every yes needs to come with personal involvement. In other words, you can actually delegate and get others to actually do the work and do things if you've got the appropriate people to actually do it, right? So there's the other ability to be able to delegate and delegate well. The fourth one is around communicating clearly and compassionately. So saying no does not have to be a negative experience. In other words, you're not saying, no, I'm not doing it. Leaders can explain really their reasons, maybe even offer some other alternatives, or maybe later on saying, why don't we look at it in the future again? And so suggesting that we have a future revisit of the item. What's actually going to happen here by doing this is it's actually maintaining relationships, even though you're saying no at the time. In other words, don't burn your bridges. Be smart about how you actually do it, but communicate clearly and compassionately. Number 5 is embrace the power of pause. So before you automatically say yes or no, take time out or a moment to consider your responses. So if you actually take time by pausing to reflect on what the priorities are, what your capacity is or your team's capacity, and whether there's an alignment to goals and so forth. One way to do it is actually say, hey, look, give me a little bit of time to think about it and I'll come back to you. Remember to breathe, because if you breathe, you can actually get oxygen to your brain, you can start to think better. You may want to write down your thoughts. Now, whether that's down on words or pictures or a mind map, whatever's the right thing for you to start brainstorming, getting your thoughts down on paper. The critical thing here is this: take time to consider. And if you can do that and buy yourself time with the power of the pause, that's going to allow you to make more of an informed decision. You see, the ability to say no is really powerful as a skill in a leader's toolkit. It really starts to help safeguard your focus, to make sure that you are aligning with activities around your strategic goals, and it starts to prevent burnout. Because you see, if you can start recognizing the noise and the distractions that really start to threaten your focus, your understanding that the obstacles to effective refusal, in other words, if you can understand what to do, and if you can employ or adopt strategies to say no effectively, that's when you can start navigating the complexities of the role with greater clarity and effectiveness. Now, if you're doing this, not only will it enhance your leadership, but it also will be the model of importance of focus and prioritization for your team. So in other words, the way that you do it is a role model for your teams to understand the same thing too. And so it's really important that you actually make sure that you're doing it and doing it well as well. Because if you keep saying yes to everything, then your team starts to think that they need to say everything, or yes to everything as well, right? So it's how you role model it, which is very, very important. Hey, listeners, that's it for this episode. It's always a pleasure being with you. Thanks for joining me on the Leadership is Changing podcast. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.